Ever feel like you need a decoder ring to really get what a valuation report is saying? I mean, you're going through it trying to figure out what something's worth, and then bam, it's disclaimer city. You know, all those
Yeah.
caveats, limitations.
Yeah,
It's enough to make your eyes glaze over.
right.
Well, on that note, this deep dive is all about making sense of those tricky little statements. We're digging into the guidelines from the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, the IBBI, from back in 2020.
Okay.
Because let's be real for a sec, whether you're buying a house, putting money in a company, or just navigating the financial world, really getting those disclaimers can be the difference between making a smart move and, well, let's
That's,
just say a costly mistake.
yeah, definitely better to be safe than sorry.
So before we get lost in a sea of legal jargon, help me out here. Why do these disclaimers even exist? Is it just to make our lives more complicated?
I get where you're coming from. It can definitely seem that way. But honestly, those disclaimers have a pretty important job. It's like they're protecting both sides, the valuers who create those reports, and then also the folks who rely on them, like you said.
So is it kind of like when they have that disclaimer at the beginning of a stunt show, like, do not attempt this at home?
You got it. On the valuer's side, disclaimers basically say, hey, we use all the information that was available at the time to put this together, but we can't predict the future. They're being transparent and managing expectations. Because valuation, it's not a crystal ball.
So it's more like, don't blame us if everything goes haywire tomorrow.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, for someone like you reading the report, disclaimers help you understand what the valuation is all about and what it's not. Like what they considered, what they didn't.
Makes sense. So why is the IBBI, India's valuation watchdog or whatever, so concerned about disclaimers? What's the bigger picture?
Well, see, before these guidelines came out in 2020, there were a lot of concerns about how different valuation reports were.
Yeah.
Lack of consistency, and that just creates confusion and mistrust with stakeholders. So the IBBI stepped in to bring some clarity and consistency to how disclaimers are used.
So it's about making sure everyone's playing by the same rules and that those rules are clear for everyone.
Exactly. The IBI wants to see disclaimers used responsibly, not as a way for valuers to avoid doing their job properly or to make things even more confusing. It's about protecting stakeholders.
So it sounds like the IBI is saying, disclaimers, yes, but use them responsibly and make sure they're actually making things clearer instead of just adding to the confusion.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about balance protecting valuers, but also making sure that anyone using those reports can actually use them to make good decisions.
Okay, so now that we've covered the why behind these disclaimers, how about we try to untangle all the jargon? I mean, what are these caveats, limitations, and disclaimers actually trying to tell us? Because sometimes it feels like they're speaking a whole different language.
All right, so we got these three amigos: caveats, limitations, and disclaimers. It's like the Bermuda Triangle of valuation reports. How do we make sense of it all without needing a law degree? It can seem a bit much, yeah, but it's more about clear communication than legal jargon. Think of caveats like those yellow caution signs you see on a winding road. They're pointing out potential bumps or uncertainties.
So say we're looking at a property and there's a caveat saying, we're assuming those building permits will go through, but if they don't, all bets are off.
Exactly. They're basically waving a little flag saying, hey, this could be an issue. Now, limitations, those are about the scope. Imagine it like a playing field. The limitations tell you what the valuer did and didn't consider.
So same example, a limitation might be like, we only looked at the building itself, not any potential problems with like the environment or the land itself.
You got it. Setting boundaries. Now, disclaimers, those are more like, hey, we did our homework based on what we knew at the time, but we can't predict the future, right?
So it's kind of a don't come knocking if the market crashes next week kind of thing.
Exactly. It protects them from being held responsible for things beyond their control.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense. But it's not all about defining the terms, is it? The IBBI guidelines also call out some disclaimer don'ts. Those big red flags that should make us pay attention. What are those all about?
Right, because some disclaimers are just not okay. They're trying to get around a valuer's responsibilities, and those are the ones you got to watch out for. Those are the ones that might mean a valuation isn't so reliable.
It's like a giant warning sign, proceed with caution.
Exactly. A big one is when a valuer tries to say they're not responsible for doing the basic due diligence. Like, oh, I didn't actually go and check the property lines or see if there were any legal issues.
It's like a chef saying, yeah, I didn't actually taste the soup before serving it to you. I don't know if I'd want to eat there.
Right. Another one is if they only use one valuation method without explaining why. There are lots of ways to value things. A good report should tell you why they chose that one.
So if they're using a one-size-fits-all approach and just hiding behind a disclaimer, maybe it's time to get a second opinion.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
The IBBI is saying you can't just slap a disclaimer on there to avoid actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Valuers need to be thorough, transparent, and accountable.
Okay, so now we've got our decoder rings ready, we know the lingo, and we're watching out for those red flags. But I feel like seeing real-world examples from the guidelines would be really helpful. Like, how does this actually play out? It's like they knew we'd need some real-life examples, you know? Like, the IBBI actually gave us some specifics for different asset types. Land and buildings, plant and machinery, even those tricky securities. So let's get down to brass tacks. How do these disclaimers actually look in the wild?
Yeah, because it's one thing to know the definitions, but seeing it all in action is really key. Helps you know what to look out for in your own dealings. So let's start with something that most folks are familiar with, land and buildings.
Makes sense. So let's say I'm looking at that cute little house with the white picket fence, living the dream. What kind of disclaimers should send up a red flag for me?
Well, one you might see is about checking the property's title. Like the valuer might say, I haven't personally gone and verified the ownership documents with the land registry. Now, this doesn't automatically mean the valuation is wrong,
Right.
but it just points out that there's a risk there that you should be aware of.
So it's like they're saying, hey, I'm trusting the seller's paperwork, but you might want to double check they actually own the place before you go picking out paint colors.
Exactly. Another one you might come across is about the physical inspection. Like, my inspection was just visual. I didn't bring in a structural engineer or anything to check out the foundation.
So that cute little house might have some not so cute foundation problems lurking under the surface.
It happens. Just something to keep in mind. You might want to call your own inspector before you sign anything.
Good point. Okay, so let's switch gears to something a little more, well, industrial. How about plant and machinery?
Sure. So with those, a common disclaimer is about the condition of the equipment. They might say something like, I relied on the company's info about the maintenance history for these machines. I didn't personally check every single part.
So it's like buying a used car, right?
Yeah.
The seller can say it's in perfect condition, but you still want your mechanic to give it a once-over.
Exactly. And lastly, let's touch on security, since those can be the most abstract.
For sure.
You might see something like, this valuation is based on their financial statements and what's publicly available. I haven't audited their books myself.
So if I'm thinking of investing, it's not enough to just rely on that report. I need to do my homework, because a company can look good on paper.
Right. You never know what a deeper dive might reveal.
Exactly. That's a good point.
I think the key takeaway here is this. These disclaimers aren't just legal mumbo-jumbo. They're giving you valuable information about what the valuation does and doesn't cover.
It's about empowering yourself, really, being able to spot those red flags and make smart decisions. We went from feeling lost in the disclaimer jungle to decoding it all like pros.
That's what we like to hear. Think of it as Disclaimer Literacy 101. Now you can spot the warning signs, understand the nuances, and approach those reports with confidence.
And hey, if you see any really crazy disclaimers out there, be sure to send them our way. Maybe we'll feature them on a future deep dive. But until then, happy investing, everyone. And remember, knowledge, especially about disclaimers, is power.